Welcome to Real, Brave, and Unstoppable. Here, you'll hear stories and inspiration about showing up in the world authentically and having the courage to create the life you want. I'm your host, Courtney Rivard. I'm a mom, recovering engineer, lover of the outdoors, and professional life coach. I help smart women just like you live happier lives full of purpose and joy by empowering them to love who they are, get unstuck, and take action toward creating the life they dream of. In other words, I help them be real, brave, and unstoppable. It is possible, and you can do it too. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to Real, Brave, and Unstoppable. Today, I'm going to tackle a little bit different topic. I'm going to share my experience of being in and healing from an emotionally abusive relationship. This was a bit of a hard episode for me to do, but I ended up deciding to because a lot of women, and probably men too, end up in relationships like this, and it's hard to know or recognize when you're in it. And oddly enough, it's really hard. Often emotionally abusive or toxic relationships can be really damaging to our sense of self and to our self-esteem. Really that sense of enoughness that we really want to have ideally. So I wanted to share my story in hopes that if my experience resonates with you, you might find some hope and support in what I've shared. It's a difficult thing to recover and heal from, and it can feel really lonely. So please know that if you can see yourself in any of this, any of what I share today, you are so not alone. In today's episode, I'm going to share a little bit about the relationship that I was in, and I'm also going to share some key things to know about narcissistic abuse or emotional abuse in general, the trauma that victims undergo, as well as some resources for healing and recovery. I'm going to share a decent amount of detail here, really for the purpose of connecting with any of you who do resonate with what I'm sharing. I hesitated to share a lot of details, but for me, it's been incredibly helpful for me to hear other people's stories because it's helped me feel not so alone. So I hope that if my story resonates, you can find some support in knowing that you're absolutely not alone. You do have support out there. So I met my ex-partner in 2017, and at that time, I really wasn't looking for anyone. I had met him before, but didn't really think anything about him because he didn't really catch my eye. He didn't really attract me. He's not really all that attractive, and I thought that at the beginning and didn't know if I wanted to date him, but he was very persistent and complimentary and sweet. He gave me so much attention and made me feel really special and loved. After a month of dating, he told me that he wanted to marry me someday, which I was like, whoa, it's a little early for that. He would tell me that I was the most beautiful woman he'd ever met. This was the most natural he'd ever felt with anyone. And there's this song that he used to play over and over again and would tell me the song reminded him of me because there was a line in it that said something about someday she's going to be my wife. He also had me in his contacts as the hottest woman in the world. I remember saying or thinking that no one's ever treated me this nice before. So my hesitance based on looks slowly changed, and I felt for him and saw certain things in him that were attractive to me. There were red flags in the early days, though. I tried to leave a lot of times, actually, and he'd always kind of sway me back into not leaving. The arguments that we'd have were really ridiculous and pretty manipulative, actually. The first fight we ever had was like crazy, stupid, and I probably should have left then after that. He got upset with me for something pretty small, and he just wouldn't let it go. Long story short, we had to be at an event for my job that evening, and it was one of those things where it was really important to be there on time. He purposely dragged his feet, and when I pushed on leaving because we were going to be late, he really pretty much manipulated me into continuing the conversation. and we were also late to my event, by telling me that if I wasn't willing to finish talking about it, it was clear that our relationship wasn't important enough to me since I was putting this event before us. We eventually were able to make our way there, late, but on the walk, he walked painfully slow just to delay us even further. So yes, very manipulative. And this was a fairly common theme, which is interesting because he always told me that I was controlling and manipulative. There were a lot of other things like this too. Anytime that I really tried to assert myself over the years, he told me I was being controlling and manipulative. If I had a need, a concern, or needed to express emotion, everything would always get flipped so that he was the victim and that I created the problem. Super invalidating. There was always something that I did or didn't do that was the reason why he wasn't willing or able to meet my need. It was always my fault. He was never wrong. I don't know where things started to go really wrong, but about 2 years in, when I was at a retreat for my coaching certification program, I got coached in front of our entire group on this. Like, should I stay? Should I go? And in the coaching I received, I kind of got the message that I should probably break up with him. But for whatever reason, I don't think I really wanted to. I think what it was is that I always thought we could go back to how things were in the beginning. There was always this little bit of hope. The problem was that the person who he was at the beginning wasn't a real person. I was just his new supply for him to feel good about himself. But anyway, I kind of decided the problem was me. Things weren't going well because I had one foot in and one foot out. So what if I really put both feet into our relationship and gave myself a timeline and then took stock of how I felt? This was the start of the belief that the problem was me, taking blame, taking responsibility for the problems we had. And I don't remember what happened exactly at the end of that timeline. Clearly we stayed together, but I'm not really sure. I don't remember how that went. But anyway, over time, that sweet romantic, like, pump me up, love me, make me feel good, loved, wanted, that really changed. The sweetness and the compliments disappeared. We called that love bombing. Sex was like pulling teeth. He rarely initiated it, and it was always a point of contention. I brought it up all the time, and somehow that was always my fault too. He would never take responsibility for being part of the problem. It was always mine. And a common theme here, you'll hear me say this over and over again, is I broke up a lot of times with him, but he would always pull me back in, saying things like he said at the beginning of our relationship. And I'd think, oh, there's that guy I met. See, he really does love me. Maybe there's hope that, maybe we can work this out. And things would be better for a little bit, but then the underlying problem would never get fixed. So then things would go back to the way they always were. So we kept repeating that cycle over and over and over again. In the last year of our relationship, things got really bad. I was so unhappy. We were basically like roommates, and he just seemed really clocked out. I mean, I probably was too. Everything was always my fault. He told me that I was always shooting him down. He told me I always had to have everything my way. I couldn't do anything right. He told me I was selfish and only thought about myself and that everything was always about me. He told me I never accepted him for who he was, that I thought he was broken. Not true. He complained that my kids didn't pay enough attention to him or didn't make him feel welcome or comfortable. And another thing that was really manipulative and controlling was that if he got uncomfortable during a conversation or felt like he was being blamed for something or having to accept responsibility for something or something like that, he'd abruptly say he was done talking with no indication of when he'd be able to come back and finish the conversation. And if I said one additional word, I'm not kidding you, I was accused of crossing boundaries and traumatizing him. So this list is very long. These are just a few things. And most of the time the arguments would get so in the weeds, I was left in this state of confusion. In my logical brain, I thought there's no way this is all my fault, but yet I would always leave it feeling really shitty because I felt like I did something wrong or that I was crazy or I wasn't remembering things right. And these should have been normal relationship conversations. like about money or about sex or about, going on vacation or money owed or things like that, that really should not have been that hard to have a conversation about. And they could have been easily solvable, but he always had to be right all the time. It was seriously impossible. So over time, though, I started to believe that maybe I was the problem. Like, I really started to take responsibility for all the things he blamed me for. Like, okay, I hear you. Let me see if I can take your perspective. Okay, I can see why you would think that or feel that way. And so then I got into my head like, okay, if I just do this and this different, things will be better. Like, if he says he's done talking, okay, honor the boundaries, honor the space, no more words. And even though I have no idea when we're going to resume that conversation, that's my problem, not his. That's the kind of stuff he would tell me too. If I'm going to order dinner, I have to make sure it's exactly the right timing. If he suggests something, don't say anything about it, just do it to avoid conflict. So as you can imagine, I grew to feel really small, lonely, and unhappy. I felt confused, inadequate, and I was in this constant state of self-doubt or even just doubt about how to talk about things. I was walking on eggshells. And I know I keep saying this, but I broke up several times and the same thing always happened, where he'd say something to give me enough of a glimmer of hope that we could work things out. And the reason I mention this again is because I just thought of this. I really kind of became addicted to the validation that I got when he came back each time. I think it made me feel wanted or needed. And I wasn't able to see that then, but now I see it really clearly. So moving on in the story, I broke up with him in February of this year. And in my mind, this was it. But the same thing happened as usual, only when I opened the door to work things out, he all of a sudden said he needed time to recover, to quote unquote find himself, even though he said, quote unquote, you were it for me. This will change my life forever. I wanted to marry you. I was willing to work on it. So I was like, okay, well, why didn't you say that before? If you had said that before, then we wouldn't be here. But he said he needed space to decide if he was willing to put in the work to revive or repair our relationship. So we spent 2 months living in the same house, like sort of in the same house separation, which was awful. I could do nothing right. I was always like crossing boundaries or not giving him enough space or doing something wrong. Whatever the problem of the day was. My anxious attachment system was completely activated, and I went into this like danger zone mode of feeling anxious all the time from not knowing what was going to happen. And when I'd ask about a timeline, he'd of course get upset with me and tell me that I didn't get to put him on a shot clock since I broke up with him, and that if he had made a decision, like he would not be living there anymore, which we'll get to later, but that was absolutely not true. He was totally jerking me around. So really, I was just waiting with no concept of how long I might have to wait. I was a mess because of I didn't know what was going to happen or what he was thinking. And of course, yes, I own that it was my choice to wait around. And now I know after educating myself about narcissistic abuse, this was the trauma bond at work. But it's crazy looking back. It's insane how I stayed in this when it was so unhealthy for me. And it really would have been the best thing to just move on and be done. Hindsight is always 20/20. At one point during this period, we had a talk where he spent over an hour telling me how I made the last 7 years of his life miserable. And at one point I got up to leave because I was really upset, as you can imagine. All of the things I had done or was doing wrong, I totally accepted responsibility for it during this talk and vowed to do those things differently. Like I said, I understand and I can see how you would feel that way. I can see your point and I really want to work on that. I want to be a better partner. And at one point, I asked him if he ever thought about how he could show up differently for me, and this kind of says it all. But he said, well, I've thought about how I can communicate my needs better, but I can't really think of anything else. That really made me sad to hear that. Like he really didn't care at all about what kind of partner he was for me. And then he just kept going, drilling it into me about how much I made him unhappy. And when I would say, well, I know this now, I'm ready to, I want to move forward. I want to be a better partner. And his response would be, it sucks that you're just realizing this after 7 years. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, well, why did you stay? I gave you so many opportunities to leave and you'd always pull me back in. And really, now I know that there was always something that he was able to get from me. People like him use people to fill a void in themselves. And they can also never be alone. But anyway, at one point I got up and I walked out of the restaurant ahead of him. When he came out, and I wasn't even that far ahead of him, but when he came out, I went to walk over to him and give him a hug and say, I'm sorry, since I was afraid that I had set him off and this was going to be a problem. And I was right. I wanted to smooth it over, but he was like, nope, don't talk to me. And he refused me and told me that my behavior really affected him, that I didn't think about us or him by walking out of the restaurant ahead of him. He said that that might have been the final nail in the coffin for him. Well, it turns out it was. He decided that May was going to be the last month at the house. So he had been spending the weekends away, which I'll share more about momentarily. But when he was leaving for the weekend at the end of April, we got in this huge argument that was related to some money he owed and move out logistics that we'd been trying to resolve for weeks. And when I tried to talk about this that morning, he got upset with me and told me very angrily that we're not going to talk about this now. He had been putting this off or fighting me on this for a long time. And normally I would have just backed down to avoid conflict, which is what I had been doing up until that point. But I was so tired of having everything controlled. And I just wanted to get that conversation out of the way, resolve it so badly. So that day, something I hadn't done in a while, but I finally stood up for myself and said, yes, we are going to talk about it. I needed to have it behind me. I just wanted to start moving on with my life, move forward. But over the years, I had learned to comply to avoid what would generally end up in an argument where I left feeling beaten down and confused. Later, I learned this is gaslighting at its finest. So he'd push me to the point of reacting, and then he'd call me crazy or accuse me of traumatizing him. The message was consistent, and it got to the point where I actually started to believe him. Or sometimes he'd get aggressive and angry and break things. This wasn't common, but did tend to happen when I'd really stand my ground. And that day in April was one of those days. So on that day, we ended up in a huge argument. Both of us were really angry. But when I asserted that I was done with him putting this off, things went very downhill. At one point, he began packing up some bottles of his bourbon collection, and we were standing facing each other yelling. And to make this story a little shorter, he ended up hitting me with one of the bottles and then destroyed my metal trash can by kicking it across my kitchen floor. He also broke a glass pane in one of the doors of my liquor cabinet. And then as he left, pushed a chair really forcefully into me. The short of that is that I called 911 and the police came to file a report and recommended that I file for a protective order and second-degree assault charges. So I did that. And I just want to share again, I share these details for context of what it's like to be in a relationship like this. I hesitated because I don't want it to come off like I'm just trying to smear this person. That's not it at all. I just think that for me, I felt so awful after all of this, crazy, wrong, so much self-doubt, worthless, thrown away, all the things. And so I really wanted to paint a picture of this so that people who have experienced this also can relate. Like I said, for me, hearing other people's stories was very validating, and it helped me feel supported and not so crazy. So now that I've shared about what the relationship was like, I'm going to share some of the things that I learned about my ex-partner after he left. This is the stuff that was really traumatic for me and requires a lot of healing and recovery. But before I do that, I do want to say that I know I'm painting this person as a monster, which in many ways he is. He is not a good human at all. But he does have a very traumatic background. And I guess maybe it's just unhealed trauma manifesting itself by hurting other people. He can be kind and caring and supportive. I just think that it's there when it works for him and he's getting something from that. So the dark side definitely outweighs the light side. And I didn't understand that until I was able to start processing all of this after he left. So here we go. Are you ready for this? It's unbelievable. The first thing I learned is that it turns out he had another girlfriend for 2 years and had been telling people, like certain people who I didn't know as well, but still knew, that we broke up 2 years ago. He actually moved directly from my place into her place with her like young daughter, 5 or 6 year old daughter. He fabricated a very impressive web of lies about me and what our status was to keep this poor woman in his grip. He told her we were exes, but just roommates, that he lived on the lower level of my house and my daughter and I lived upstairs. Totally not true. He told her that I couldn't accept that our relationship was over and he was just staying because he was afraid I'd go crazy on him. He said that he was afraid or felt unsafe in the house, which is kind of contradictory and also a little hilarious because he's 5'11" and 240 pounds. And he could literally very easily kill me if he wanted to. He also told her that I asked him to pretend that we were together because my family is ultra conservative and wouldn't approve if we were living together and marriage wasn't on the table. He also created a bunch of lies around why he couldn't spend time with her or stay at her house. That's just a sampling. I honestly don't even know how he kept all of these lies straight. He was very good at it, very practiced apparently. And I honestly don't know how she believed any of this. It was so ridiculous. But I guess you believe what you want to. Here's another funny one. On Labor Day weekend last year, one of the breakup cycles had happened and we reconnected, but then he wanted to spend the weekend with his friend who lives 3 hours away. He said he needed some space to think and recover. Then on Saturday morning, he showed up at like 8 o'clock, like 7:45, 8 o'clock. Again, his friend lives 3 hours away. So you do the math. I asked him what he was doing back so soon, and he said, I just decided I wanted to be here with you. Well, turns out he and his other girlfriend had a fight the night before, and she was apparently crying, and he did what he usually does, ignore when you're emotional. So if you've been in a relationship like this, you know that having emotions is not a good thing. Apparently he slept on the couch and then just got up and left early the next morning, which is why he was home early. He was not 3 hours away, maybe 45 minutes or an hour. But we went camping later that day, and now I know that they were texting the whole time, like making up and stuff like that. More lies about what he was doing and all the things. She didn't know that we were a couple. Like, she didn't want to believe we were a couple. Another thing that is so confusing to me is before Christmas, when clearly they were, deep into their affair, I asked him if we were okay. And his response was, I bought you an expensive Christmas present. I'm not going anywhere. So everything he said to me, even when I questioned it, was like, I'm here with you. You're my person. I want this to work. One time I mentioned that I was concerned that maybe there was someone else, and he actually told me that traumatized him and he was cheating. I also learned that he was sexting with at least 2 or 3 other women, and he'd do that while we were on family vacations, sending pictures and videos and all the things. I learned that he would hook up with other women for sex on weekends when he'd travel for work. The number of pictures and videos he sent to all these women and the sexual texts totally devastated me. Those pictures and videos have our sheets and our bathroom sink in the background. Gross, right? For a while after I learned about all this, I'd break down in tears. I couldn't help but think about how worthless I must have been to him and how little he cared about me and my kids to have treated us like he did. And he blamed the failure of our relationship on me, when normal people know that there's no way you can work on a relationship and be successful when one partner is cheating and lying. Another thing I learned is that the last 3 of his exes before me had the same experience that I did. Definitely a pattern. The love bombing in the beginning, devaluation in the middle of the relationship, and then blaming and eventually discarding at the end. Not to mention the smear campaign of making everyone else think that I'm crazy. So when I say same experience, I'm talking down to the exact same language in texts. He could have literally copied and pasted it. I wondered for a long time why he stuck around in the spring for as long. I felt like he was really jerking me around, and I even asked him, and he said, I promise I'm not jerking you around. But it started to become very clear to me, actually, when he moved out and I found out where he was moving, it became very clear to me. He moved from my house to his other girlfriend's house. And this was the earliest he could have moved in with her. So now I know that. And he was basically using me for a place to stay. So I've shared with you a little bit about what I've learned about him and what was going on, quote unquote, behind the scenes. But now I really want to share about how this all impacted me on a personal level. Relationships like this can cause a lot of damage, and I didn't realize how much damage they could do until he left, and I started also connecting with other people who have gone through this too. First of all, the incident that happened at the end, I still have nightmares and flashbacks from that day. I'll wake up in the middle of the night with racing thoughts about it. So that's really hard. Everything in my house reminds me of a memory, good memories, bad memories, and they in turn trigger movies in my mind about the incident, the things I know he was doing with other women while we were supposed to be like a team, a partnership, building a life together. And the lies he told, the videos and pictures I saw, it was really hard having those memories pop up in my brain so often, and they still do. I also learned that I experienced, among other things, something that's called traumatic invalidation, which is a continuation of what happened in my childhood and other relationships I've been in. But the effects of traumatic invalidation have the end result of beliefs or thoughts like, I'm inferior, I don't belong, I cause problems, I'm crazy, I'm unlovable, I don't matter, I can't be trusted, and I'm incompetent. Things like that. Not super positive thoughts. I also learned that you can have symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder after a relationship like this, even if the abuse is primarily emotional. There are a lot of studies that show that emotional abuse is just as destructive as physical abuse can be. It also became evident to me that I had made myself very small as time went on to fit myself into this relationship that we had built. I couldn't know more than him. It ended up being a fight. I couldn't be better than him at something. If I tried to be, I was being competitive, and that I'm not supposed to be competitive with my partner. That would be a fight. I couldn't ask him if he needed help with something. But if he asked me if I needed help with something and I didn't want help, I could do it myself, then again, you're not supposed to be competitive with your partner. I couldn't express a need without it being turned around on me and how I victimized him. I couldn't talk about anything that I wanted or needed from him or that was an issue without it being turned on me as well. Why it was my fault that he couldn't meet that need or help me resolve that issue. So my life really became about keeping the peace and walking on eggshells. I sort of lost my confidence in all of this. And I'm able to realize that now, but my confidence is a shred of what it used to be. I was afraid to assert myself. I lost confidence in my opinions and what I knew, which is a lot. I'm a really smart, talented person, and I didn't feel that way when I was with him. And when we were out together, I'd always defer to him to ask him what he wanted, even if it was like, what should we order? Or, I was really afraid to contradict in any way for fear of an argument or him getting upset that I was shooting him down or always had to have my way, which was so not true. If we were around people that he knew and I didn't, I usually kind of hung back on the quieter side, which later he used against me. He told someone that no one ever said they liked me when they met me, but they told him that they liked this new woman a lot. So that must say something bad about me. This is actually untrue because he used to tell me when people would tell him they liked me. Basically, over the years, I created this protective wall around myself, my authentic self, to protect that me from him if he got upset with me. So I was always trying to explain, to defend, and to prove that I wasn't who he said I was. And often it crossed my mind that he thinks that I'm this person that other people don't really seem to think I am. So why would the person who's supposed to be my partner look at me more negatively and see me as someone who the people who love me and know me best don't see me as? That should have been a red flag, a huge one. So if you're noticing that the person you're with thinks things about you that nobody else that knows you well thinks about you, you want to be with someone who thinks really highly of you, who respects you and loves you for the good and the bad. So after my relationship with him ended and I learned all of the things that he had been doing over the years, I really struggled with feelings of being abandoned and rejected. I felt worthless and inadequate. How could someone who I thought cared about me and loved me and said he was not going anywhere, that we were a forever thing, that he wanted to marry me, how could he do this to me? I must have been horrible to deserve that, right? Wrong. I had to do a lot of mindset work, and I'm actually still having to really train my brain not to go there. It's really tough. It did a lot of damage. When narcissistic personalities leave a relationship, they usually will launch what's called a smear campaign to paint the other person as crazy and unstable. And what happens is the new supply, we call it, will never believe the old person what happened because the old person is crazy. And, there's just no way that that person would believe. And they start to paint this picture so that they can now look like they left a really terrible they did leave a toxic relationship, but they paint the other person as being this toxic, crazy, unstable person. He did this to me. And in fact, he started laying that groundwork for this when he started having the affair with his 2-year girlfriend way before he even left. She already thought I was nuts. And maybe even before then too. He told her all kinds of nasty things about me that made me look super crazy and mentally unstable. Criticized my parenting, criticized my family, and he even told his mom this stuff. And to be fair to the other people, if he would have said those things to me, and actually he did say these things to me about his last ex, and I believed him, but if it had been me hearing the things that he was saying about me, I would have thought, wow, what a psycho. So I'm sure she thinks I'm nuts. And that's okay, because she doesn't know me. Whatever. He also said some awful things about my kids. And the worst part is what he said to a couple of his friends who I also know and his parents who I loved. It's really hard to know someone is saying awful things about you, especially someone who you thought cared about you. It feels really shameful and embarrassing. And quite honestly, it made me feel so small. I've had to work through that as well. And the people who believe him, I guess they're really just not my people, and that's okay. Just a side note, the last episode I recorded is about holding your head high or taking the high road when people are saying mean things about you. That kind of relates to this. So if that resonates, go listen to that episode. So the next thing I want to talk about is, because this is something that I struggled with a lot, and I think every person who looks back on a relationship asks these kinds of questions, but why don't we leave relationships like this? There are many reasons, and one is what's called a trauma bond. Some of us get addicted to the positive reinforcement that we get after the abuser is upset. So I think for me, I got addicted to the reconnection after I would break up with him, which is why we always got back together. And this is why when he needed space, I also had such a hard time. I just needed that positive reinforcement that I was enough, that I was lovable and that he wanted me and that I wasn't crazy. My protective self was in high gear trying to prove that to him. And so when he would come back, it would fuel that need to be wanted and loved. My protective self would be like, oh yeah, he wanted you. He didn't want to lose you. So for me, for my needy self, or the self that couldn't provide that validation to myself, it was really kind of like a drug. And it didn't work. And it will never, ever work with the narcissistic personality. Second, it wasn't all bad. There were good times too. And those memories kept me there as well. I thought maybe we could get that back. And it's nice to have a person, someone to share my day with, someone to hug and kiss in the morning when he left for work and at night when he came home. Being alone can be really lonely sometimes. The next thing is time. We were together for 7 years, so it was a really big time investment. The second longest relationship I've ever been in next to my marriage. So if you've been in a long-term relationship, even if it's been just a couple of years, the time thing is really big for people. If there was hope that this might work or might have worked, I really wanted to do that work. I didn't want to start over if there was a possibility that we could be happy. And if there was, of course, I wanted to take that possibility to build on what was there instead of just starting from scratch. And the next thing is residual loss, like his family. I really loved his family. They're the best. And also mutual friends. He's told so many people how crazy I am, which is another play out of the narcissistic personality playbook. I mentioned the smear campaigns earlier. And the things these people say about me too are not kind or true. So I know some of these people, and so I've lost connections there in a way as well, even though they weren't close friends. And I guess one could argue that if they believe the things he says about me, do I really want to have them in my life anyway? Probably not. But there are a lot of reasons that we stay in these kinds of things. And it's common for those of us who get out of these relationships to beat ourselves up and say, well, I should have left earlier. Why didn't I have the courage to leave? I was weak. And okay, for me, I think, well, yeah, maybe I didn't have the courage to leave, but there are reasons for that were bigger. So it's kind of a mix of both. Do I wish I would have left earlier? Yes, absolutely. But you don't know what you don't know, and hindsight is always 20/20. So now, how do we heal from this? It's a hard journey. Personally speaking, I'm not sad that we're not together anymore. I know it's better for me. I'm better off in the long run. I know I didn't deserve what he did to me or how he treated me. I know I deserve somebody who loves me and is going to treat me really well, love me unconditionally. Yeah, so how do we heal? Well, first of all, you're going to have a lot of feelings. You're going to have a lot of thoughts, a lot of them, and they're going to be really painful and hard to hold. And so first, you have to let yourself just be in it, to feel all of those feelings. It's hard, I know, but there's really no way around it. The only way is through. There's a book called Whole Again that talks about this. We have to heal through unconditionally loving ourselves. And to do that, we need to love ourselves through feeling the hard feelings. We have to be self-compassionate and nurturing. Our protective self tries to protect us from having those bad feelings, but they're really a part of the process. Emotions are just energy that need to move through us. They're an experience we're having. They're not who we are. They don't stay forever. In the book, the author talks about how the question, why do I feel like this, should really be replaced with, what is this feeling? So it's a space of curiosity and openness. It's inviting in what's present, making space for what's uncomfortable, and also teaching yourself that you can carry what's hard and still step towards what's important to you. And what's important for most people is, in this context, having a healthy relationship, being happy and feeling joy again. It's common to think that if you allow yourself to feel hard emotions, that you're not going to feel good again or they're going to stay forever. But that's not true, because those emotions are just moving through you. They change, they come and they go. You can carry them while you take steps toward bringing more happiness, joy, and connection into your life. There are a bunch of Facebook groups for people who have been through relationships like this. And one of the things I see the most is that you have to kind of redefine yourself after this kind of experience, because it really tears down your sense of self. I know for myself, I've felt a little lost and kind of like, who am I even anymore? Because I really dumbed down a lot of the things about me just to kind of keep things peaceful. So it's finding the things that bring you joy, letting that be your compass, finding yourself again in that way, letting that guide you. A lot of times when we feel really down, the tendency is to not want to do anything. Like we have a hard time getting motivated. It's really hard to get up and get moving. But we need to recognize that if we just feel this feeling, we can make space for it and still step forward towards the things that bring us joy or that you're passionate about, the things that help you find meaning or purpose in life. And it might not be easy, but we take baby steps. That's really important. So when you find yourself feeling stuck, then you just ask yourself, what would bring me joy, happiness? What am I passionate about? Let me take a tiny, tiny step. If you like running, maybe it's just putting on your running shoes and stepping out the door. Maybe you don't get farther than that. You just do a little tiny thing. The second thing I would say is to just let yourself cry. Don't fight the crying or the feelings. Or if you feel rage on into a pillow. Go to a rage room or a screaming room. Just let it all out. And notice how those emotions feel in your body. Observe how they change and how they shift. Tara Brach's RAIN meditation is great for this. You can Google it, but RAIN stands for recognize, acknowledge, investigate with curiosity, and nurture. Recognize is just noticing what you're feeling. Acknowledge is naming it. I notice I'm feeling a lot of sadness right now. Investigating with curiosity is exploring what it's like to experience this emotion. What does it feel like in my body? If it was an object, what would it look like? And then asking it, do you have something to tell me? Or what do you need? And then the last thing is nurture. So if that emotion needs some attention, give it some attention. If it says, I just need some encouragement, give it some encouragement. It's a part of you that's feeling this way. And so you just have to love it. That's really important. I was working with a client last week, and when I asked her that question about what the emotion needed, she said it said to her that it needed some attention. I thought that was beautiful because oftentimes we don't want to give our emotions attention. We just want to get rid of them. Again, you can find the RAIN meditation online if you Google it. Okay, so I mentioned this a little earlier, but when we're healing from emotionally abusive relationships, we really have to find our joy again. Over time, we've shrunk ourselves to be small, so we need to get out and meet new people, try new things, reconnect with old friends and hobbies. It's common for people that get involved with narcissistic personalities to isolate and not hang out with certain friends anymore. In my case, the friends I hung out with didn't really like my partner, so we gradually grew apart. Now I'm trying to reconnect with some of those people, and that's been really nice. The next thing is journaling. That can help a lot. The aftermath can feel really confusing, so getting your thoughts and feelings out can be really therapeutic. I've been making a lot of connections in my journaling between this relationship with my ex and other romantic relationships I've had in my life, as well as the relationship I had and have with my father. Our childhood wounds show up in our relationships. Sometimes it takes a while to draw those connections, but writing out what's in your brain can be really helpful in making sense of some of these things and then learning how to heal that so you can make different choices moving forward. Next is to learn to validate yourself and to give yourself love instead of relying on an external source for that. Narcissistic personalities only rely on external sources for love, validation, emotions, all the things. And that's why they need people who admire them and adore them, who give them all the attention and put them on a pedestal. They need that attention. But when we look outside of ourselves, our happiness will always be at the effect of someone else. And that's totally out of our control. And that's why narcissistic personalities typically cheat. And then, they discard people and they move on to the next person very quickly. Is because when somebody they've been with for a while stops giving them all that attention and, putting them on a pedestal, they need someone new to do that for them. But you also have to ask yourself how you feel when you don't have control. So for me, that's anxious. And that's how I showed up in the last couple months of my relationship with my ex. Completely anxiety ridden because I was seeking validation from him and I wasn't giving it to myself. It was that addiction to the positive reinforcement that I was lovable and wanted, that I was enough. And above all, we have to take care of ourselves as we heal. I read that when we lose an attachment, it activates the same pain centers in our brain that are activated when we break a bone. So if you were to break a bone, would you take care of it and nurture it back to being whole again? Or would you just power through and ignore it? I think you probably know the answer to that. So why would we just plow through this? We have to take time to heal and nurture ourselves back into wholeness again. We all want to feel better really fast, immediately, and it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. So the last thing I want to say here is that you need to believe that you're worthy of love and that you are lovable and perfect just the way you are. Anyone who doesn't love all of you, even your flaws, is not the person for you. Narcissistic personalities don't really have feelings. Like I said before, they rely on attention and adoration from others to create those good feelings for them. And since they need to experience both ends of the spectrum of emotions, they need to constantly have someone, quote unquote, behind the curtain who they can treat poorly in addition to the person that they're like love bombing, like the new person. And also the new person that will give them all of this attention and put them on the pedestal. Another really important thing to add today is that if you're experiencing or have experienced any of this, there are resources for you. For sure, find a therapist. You likely have trauma that you need to heal. If you've experienced domestic violence, please be safe. Make sure you're safe. Please get help and lean on your support network. There are a ton of resources for victims of domestic violence, including legal support, counseling services, safe havens, and more. If you happen to be in Maryland, you can contact the Family Justice Center or the Abused Persons Program for help, and they can direct you to free services that can support you. If you're in a position where you need to obtain a restraining order or protective order or file assault charges, your state or county likely has, like the Family Justice Center, likely has something like that, which is sort of a one-stop shop for what do I do? How do I navigate this? For me, the Family Justice Center has been amazing, amazing. This whole legal system and what to do is very confusing, and they were incredible. So please, if you need something like that, please seek out resources in your area that can help you with that. This is a little more of a niche topic than I would generally cover, but I did think it was important. And I really like to be authentic with like what I have been through and how I can help other people with my experience. And I know that what I talk about here will help someone. So if you know someone who this might resonate with, please share it with them. I know that for me, talking to other people and hearing the stories of other people who have been through this has been so helpful for me, just in knowing that I'm not alone, because feeling alone really sucks. What happens in these types of relationships is that we tend to take on the blame, and that feels lonely and awful. But know that it's not your fault. It is not you. You need to internalize that this is not about you at all. It's about the other person and their just messed up way of being. And that's hard. It's hard to internalize that it's not you, even though you were discarded or abused or whatever, but that's what you've got to do. It's not you. It's not your fault. And then there are a couple of books that I thought were very helpful to me. One of them I mentioned earlier is called Whole Again. I forget the author. The other one is called It's Not You by Dr. Ramani. This book is super helpful in helping you understand that this is just the type of person that you're with. It's not you. There's nothing wrong with you. And I think that's so valuable to know that the other people have gone through what you've gone through as well. A couple other books that I would recommend are Self-Compassion by Kristen Neff. This kind of healing takes so much self-compassion because there's a lot of second guessing and kind of beating yourself up that can happen. And then finally, not directly related, but I think that if you've been in a relationship like this, you sort of have to look at like what your attachment style is and like how that can be a magnet for people like this. So the book Attached is amazing. It's a great book, very informative. So those are the books that I recommend. I think that it's so valuable to know that other people have gone through what you've gone through as well. So seek out other people, talk to them, connect, hear their stories, share your story. So again, I hope this resonated. I hope you're able to take something from this episode. And also too, I should mention, if you know someone who's been going through this or has been through it, just support them, be there for them. Ask them what they need because it's sometimes hard to know. It's a really emotional place to be. And I know sometimes the emotions of someone who's dealing with something like this can be a lot for people. But your friend, your family member, they need you. They need to know you're there for them, even if it's just to listen. Okay, so one more thing. Just to reiterate, please share the episode with anyone you think might benefit. And also, if you're just enjoying the podcast in general, please leave a rating and a review. That's always so helpful in helping other people find the show. So again, my friends, thank you for tuning in to Real, Brave, and Unstoppable, and I will see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Real, Brave, and Unstoppable. If you'd like to learn more about creating an authentic life that's true to who you are, visit CourtneyRivard.com/lovelife to download your free guide on how to build your vision and create a life that you love. You'll be so glad you did. I'll see you next time.